As U.S. troops deploy to the Mexican border to deal with the fallout of Fast and Furious, details continue to emerge about this flagrantly illegal operation to arm Mexican drug lords in a supposed sting operation. But as veteran investigative journalist Bill Conroy points out, operations like this were going on years prior to Fast and Furious, and this latest scandal is just another example of a drug war that is not what it is believed to be. This is the GRTV Feature interview with your host James Corbett and our special guest, Bill Conroy.
Yeah, well, the Fast and Furious was essentially a program where the ATF was allowing gun smugglers to purchase weapons in the United States at gun stores and gun shows wherever they could get them, and knowing that they were buying these and then allowing the smugglers to take them across the border into Mexico. And to the cartels, and primarily the Sinaloa cartel, it appears, is where the majority of these guns went. And the idea was, which is kind of insane, is that somehow after the fact they would trace these weapons and be able to make cases against the higher ups in the cartels. The problem with that is they never told the Mexican government they were doing this, so it'd be hard for the Mexican government to really help them out across the border. The ATF has no law enforcement power in Mexico, and once the guns crossed the border, they just disappeared. I mean, they could go 1,000 different ways. So really, it was kind of a boggled operation. It's not clear if that was by intention and they really wanted the guns to go there, that there was some other larger purpose to this, or it was just ineptness on the part of law enforcement agencies. The Fast and Furious was the program that we're hearing about now in the news, and that's been running, or had been running, since about the fall of 2009. And it was done in conjunction with the FBI and the DEA and ICE. It was a joint task force program, but ATF's end was this gun running thing. And they were all aiming to make cases. So there was a lot of turf wars and a lot of Keystone Cop type stuff going on that could have explained why this happened. But at the end of the day, it really was not a very well thought out. In fact, it was a disastrous program that led to a lot of Mexicans getting murdered. And before that, what we discovered and what has come out in the media is that this program is like these gun running programs. And the reason they call them, or gun walking, the reason they call them gun walking is essentially they're allowing the guns to walk. After they watch them purchased and know who got them, they let the perps walk with the guns. And a similar program was run under the Bush administration going back to 2006. It's called Wide Receiver. Same kind of modus operandi. And, recently we talked to an ATF source who told us this program, originally they thought it was only run out of Phoenix across the Arizona border. Well, apparently it was also being run across the New Mexico border. And there was a case made there about a year ago whereby they busted most of the town leaders in this little town on the border on the U.S. side called Columbus, who were all involved with gun running, including the police chief and the mayor and the village trustee. And that in that particular case, there were at least 150, if not more, guns that were known to have disappeared, and they disappeared after the investigation was started. And at least 15 of those guns were later found in Mexico by the Mexican government at crime scenes. And, 6 of them tied to murders. 8 people were murdered with 6 of those guns. So that's just 6 of the guns. And in Fast and Furious on the Arizona border, there were a couple thousand. They really don't know how many guns walked. Those are the estimates. The odds are it was more. And there is some evidence that this was also allowed to happen along the Texas border, a case we followed for quite some time, Sully Castillo, who was a former DEA agent who had been claiming for quite some time that he thought they were corrupt ATF agents, but that they were allowing guns into Mexico. And he ended up, it's a long story, but he got arrested for on gun charges and convicted, basically because he didn't have the right paperwork. But the long and short of it is we had reported on the fact that something was going on along the Texas border, where apparently guns were being allowed to be, shipped across the border in large quantities and were ending up somewhere in the hands of the Mexican drug organizations. So this is the gist of it. You had this massive flow of weapons, essentially sanctioned by the U.S. government or ATF, and we don't know how high up it went. We can argue about that. Who authorized this? Which agencies beyond ATF really were involved, and how high up in the government this went? But it's clear it was an ongoing program, at least back to 2006, which ironically is the same time Calderon came into office. President Felipe Calderon of Mexico came into office in late 2006 and declared his war on the cartels. In other words, he was going to clean up Mexico and get rid of the cartels. And so he's waging this big war at the same time as this flow of weapons is coming south. Most of it, from what we can tell, going to the Sinaloa cartel, which ironically now has become arguably the dominant cartel in Mexico, and where this was happening along the border. There's an area called Juarez that's south of El Paso in Texas, and then it goes over to New Mexico. It was Columbus and Palomas, and then they go over to Nogales in Arizona. That whole stretch from Nogales basically to Juarez, El Paso, is where all this was happening, and it crosses, essentially for sure 2 states, a little bit of Texas. And the Sinaloa cartel is basically, taken over that territory from another dominant player that was there for years, at least on the El Paso side, was the Juarez cartel. And we had done some reporting where we actually, one of the former he's in hiding right now, but he's a former cartel member who had worked for the Juarez cartel and kind of told us about one of the guys, Mufaro, who was just busted in Mexico a couple months back, who had originally worked for the Juarez cartel and then switched sides and went to the Sinaloa cartel, and was essentially had a reputation for being a bit of a murderer, and he was using his knowledge of the Juarez cartel to finger folks that were operating these drug trafficking routes for the Juarez cartel, so the Sinaloa cartel could take them out. And it's probably no coincidence that particular individual, Mufaro, about a year ago, they found a stash of weapons in Juarez in a house that belonged to him. There were 40 of them that were traced back to Fast and Furious. So you have these connections where you find the Sinaloa cartel, kind of rising to dominance with a lot of firepower at the same time this operation's going on. And whether that's by design or by accident, we don't know. We do know that there's a guy in trial in Chicago right now, named Zambada, who is the son of one of the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel. He claims that the Sinaloa cartel had a deal with the U.S. government whereby they would rat out their rival cartels in exchange for essential immunity from being busted, and also information on how to avoid arrest in Mexico when the Mexican government was looking for them. Mind you, the Mexican government's plenty corrupt too, so they had their players there helping them out. So essentially, this Zambada guy was on trial, the son of the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, is claiming that Fast and Furious is evidence and was part of this agreement that these guns were, in fact, on purpose given to the Sinaloa cartel to accomplish the very thing that they've accomplished, which is to monopolize the drug routes along the northern border between, released between Texas and Arizona. And from what we can tell, and from what, I guess if you read the newspapers and from having been there, it definitely, besides Juarez being the most violent city, that while this was all going on, there's, Juarez became essentially a war zone. And there has been, and it's always hard to tell because people, wear uniforms, they don't tell you, I work for the Sinaloa cartel. But it does appear that the Chapo Guzman and Ismael Zambada, who are the head of the Sinaloa, the leaders, at least they keep this organization moving, do now have more control, far more control in that area.
Well, let's move to the latest reports. And as I mentioned, you have a new report up on narconews.com. U.S. troops may now be coping with Fast and Furious fallout, referencing a couple of different sources talking about U.S. troop movements along the U.S.-Mexican border. Perhaps you can talk about that and how it ties into this story.
Yeah, well, we reported that, I don't know, a week ago, and there hasn't been any national coverage of it, but there's been some local border papers that have reported that they've moved in about 500 troops, active duty troops. Nobody really knows why they're there. They claim they're there just to kind of support. This is a Joint Task Force North, which is there to support and protect the U.S. border, but also to support Border Patrol. But basically what our sources are telling us is we've had special operations forces active along the border and even inside Mexico, going back at least to 2009. Now, these people were there mostly, it weren't large numbers. They were doing kind of reconnaissance and intelligence gathering and assisting Mexican troops and Mexican special forces with operations, that kind of thing. And now we haven't been able to get the paperwork on this, but the claim was, and this we reported on in last week, but we had known about it for a while, was that these special operations folks, and they were there in, maybe teams of 4 and 5, what have you, were reporting that there was a massive flow of guns going across the border into Mexico. And they had allegedly contacted the Department of Justice, State Department, asked, is there some kind of operation going on? And never got a response. And of course, around that time frame, that's exactly when Fast and Furious was going on. So they had run across this trail of iron going south from the United States, and it was making it a little sticky for them because there was a lot more firepower down there. What happened in the last, and I just don't have the story in front of me, so I'm guessing in the time frame of the last week or two, is there were troops dispatched, to the border area. And essentially, between that route that I talked about, the drug trafficking route along the border there between Nogales and Columbus, and just to the west of Juarez, is the stretch of border that they're positioned on, and there's armored vehicle carriers there, and again, they're not saying why they're there. They're saying they're there just to support. But our understanding is that embedded in those troops are some additional special operation folks, and they are doing some missions down there across the border. And we still don't really know what that is. There have been rumors of arms stashes along some of the backwoods areas there. In that that whole area is, for a long time, has been a trafficking route, and the guns go south and the drugs come north, and along the way there's stash sites for transporting this stuff.